Oh, can everyone, good morning. Can everyone see what I have here in my hand? Paper napkin. I'm sure we've got plenty of those on tables throughout the room. You can see that it's blank, or is it? The story goes that in 1966, Herb Kelleher and a couple of his associates met in a bar and sketched out on the back of a paper napkin what would become today's Southwest airline. It was a triangle with Dallas at the apex, San Antonio and Houston at the other corners. And that is now a big web. Southwest flies to over 100 destinations, including many international locations. In 1981, Burt Rutan, his fighter pilot brother Dick, and their pilot friend Jenna were at a restaurant in the Mojave Desert. And the idea came up about flying a small airplane around the world, nonstop, on one tank of gas. Seems pretty crazy. But it wasn't crazy to Burt. And he sketched again on the back of a napkin his idea for Voyager. 5 years later, Dick and Jenna flew around the world nonstop on one tank of gas. So when we look at this napkin, and it looks like, what is there? But if we think about it, right, the Bryce, this blank space affords the opportunity for people with big ideas to set them free and to turn them into reality. And really, that's a big part of what we are doing here, not only today, but we're at this real inflection point in history in terms of how we move forward. Things are changing so rapidly with respect to advanced air mobility. We've seen the exponential growth of drones. Electric, eVTOLs and others are a few years away from being a reality. And commercial space is growing by leaps and bounds. And it is the mission of the FAA to integrate all of this innovation into our national airspace system. So these are big challenges that we, working in collaboration with the entire industry and even the balance of the world, to figure out how do we get it right. And we need ideas, we need fresh ideas to meet the challenges of our time. We need to think about how we go forward. What is this network? What is the framework? What do we need to make this all happen? Now, what I say for us at the FAA, our job is to get it right. And what we have to do, what we must do on behalf of the flying public is ensure that we can safely, efficiently, and in an environmentally friendly way, integrate all of this into not only into our national airspace system, but around the world. So we are excited. We are ready to take on these challenges. We'll talk more about it in a moment here, but we need your help. And the industry needs your help for your big ideas. We're thinking about, let's take the environment. And this is one where we have some really big challenges. Now, we have work to say, what is the next quantum leap? We've wrung out as much efficiency in terms of how we do with conventional aircrafts as we can. But as technology, as battery technology has evolved, now we can certainly look to electrification. Things that a few years ago seemed impossible, the ability to put electric motors and propellers in places where we couldn't before, that is now on the verge of being a reality. And as we think about, again, turning to the environmental space, all of us can remember when airliners sputed out trails and trails of black yarn, and you had to stop talking when one was flying overhead. But you look at the efficiency gains we've had today, and now they're quieter, they're more efficient. We're working on things like sustainable aviation fuel, but all of this requires all of us collectively working together to make this a reality. So let those ideas fly, and there's no better time than today. Thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to the questions.
Well, Administrator Nolen, first let me say thank you for joining us today. We are honored that you're taking time to spend with us. I can't help but think that we live in a moment where there were a lot of drawings on paper napkins that have now turned into blueprints that are quickly becoming reality. And in particular, when we think about unmanned systems, you briefly mentioned in your remarks, and I'm hoping you can expand on it a little bit, kind of your vision for integrating technology that frankly many of us wouldn't have even dreamed about when we were kids safely into an airspace system that still has the technology that most of us fly on today. How do we make those two things work together? How do you execute that vision day to day?
Well, thank you, Neil. The FAA has been really good at integrating technology. You look at the work being done, you look at all the new models of conventional airliners out there, all of those have met and been certified by the FAA and everything that operates safely in our airspace. So we've proven that we know how to do that. And we've been thinking long and hard about what we've done. One of the things we did back in 2018, we stood up at the FAA, the Center for Emerging Concepts and Innovation, all designed to say, how do we safely, efficiently, and in an environmentally friendly way, integrate this new technology. So when we think about advanced air mobility, let's take that for a moment. We think of it in three ways. First, we've got to certify the vehicle. And we've already have the regulatory structure in place to be able to do that. And our teams are already working, and we are fairly close, and we're moving on an aggressive schedule. The second thing we need to figure out is how it will operate. You have vehicles that take off vertically like a helicopter, translate into forward flight, land vertically. So our ability to understand the kind of training that operators, pilots will need, that's the second piece that we're looking at. And then thirdly, we got to figure out how do we integrate that into our nation's airspace and do it in a way that allows all of this to safely coexist with everything that we have out there today. So that's what we're working on, and we're not doing it in isolation. We are working in close coordination and collaboration with the industry, and we're working with our international partners as well. We'd like, to the extent we can, to have as harmonized a playing field as we can. So all of those are the things that we come to work and think about every day about how we make this happen.
So I'm going to ask you a question that I know the answer to, and I think everyone in this room knows the answer to, but as a public official, I think it's important that we get people on the record about, because we often, in this moment in time, have an incredible lack of trust. And so in a moment where you have lack of trust in institutions, rumors and fears can take hold, including about new technology that maybe people shouldn't be fearful about. Right. So do you have any fear as we integrate these new technologies in the air system when you put yourself and your family on a plane or go to the airport?
It's a really good question. The first answer is no, I don't, but let me tell you why. So I've been a pilot for 42 years. I started my career in a small helicopter with a six-pack of instruments, and the last thing I flew was the Airbus A380. So you can imagine across the arc of that career, I've seen technology come, evolve, and all of that has been safely integrated. What we will never do, and I can promise you that what we will never do, is sacrifice safety for the sake of innovation. It has to go hand in hand. The public expects it, and they demand it. So what you will see from us is ensuring we have the framework. But what we will do, we say that the industry innovates on technology. We have to integrate in terms of our policy framework. And so that's the piece that we grapple with every day. And we are doing it in a measured way. And our goal is to try to match the tempo. It may not match because safety is our North Star. What we will do is match the level of energy to make sure that we can get it right. And at the end of the day, nothing is going to go out there that we don't have absolute comfort that and assurance that the public can be put on safely.
So what's not going to change is safety.
Absolutely.
But other things about our flying experience are going to change. What When you look out at the range of technologies, electric air taxis, unmanned vehicles, when you think about environmental sustainable fuels, the way we get to net zero carbon emissions, when you look at that whole spectrum, and probably a few other things, what do you think is going to change the average passenger's experience the most, and what's it going to look like in the future?
So you look at where we've been. We're coming out of the backside of a pandemic. We've seen as the industry rebuilds, as we look across the whole of government to say, how do we have a landscape in place that not only connects communities, smaller communities to their larger community. I envision a time in just a few short years that one can get in an air taxi to go from maybe not here within Papa 56, the restricted airspace here, but certainly could be out to Baltimore, Washington, or out to Dulles, or even to get to other places. We're on the verge of making that a reality. But we need to think about, even beyond that on a greater scale, we have to think about what does that whole ecosystem look like? What is electrification? You talked about sustainable aviation fuel. We're doing a lot. This year, we're using sustainable aviation fuels at the tune of about 5 million gallons, but our aspirational goal is to get to 3 billion gallons of sustainable aviation fuel by the end of the decade, and to meet our long-term aspirational goal of having 35 billion by 2050. So there's a lot of work to be done in that space. There's a level of energy and excitement among all of the industry stakeholders. So these are things we're seeing. We are seeing that in the next, say, 3 to 5 years, we're talking about 3 million drones. We're talking about hundreds, if not thousands at some point, of urban air mobility vehicles. All of that has the ability to dramatically change the way we fly, the way we get around.
Yeah, we talk so much about the internet as bringing new levels of connectivity that sometimes we forget that aviation was one of the first mains of connectivity, and it's keeping and continuing to improve. And for a boy from rural Oklahoma, that's pretty good news. Yeah. Let's stick on sustainable aviation fuel for a moment. The administration released an aviation climate action plan. Right. Tell us how that plan relates to what will have to be enormous growth in sustainable fuels to meet the goals that you just outlined.
And so the administration, as you know, they've laid out some aspirational goals about how we get there. I know that we've got many of the airline CEOs are in the audience or will be at some point today. And we are all working. This is not one for just us alone to solve for, though we are certainly committed to it. We're going to make sure that we can do this on a global scale. Obviously, our airlines are not just operating here in the U.S. So as we think about that, as we think about where this feedstock will come from, how do we move beyond SAF, as everyone should be aware, is a drop-in fuel. That ability to use it in existing systems, existing infrastructure, and so how do we build and grow? That's a challenge that we're continuing to work toward. And on a longer-term goal, and as we lead up, we're just a little bit more than a week away from the 41st ICAO Assembly. So part of our challenge there is to work with our international partners and the entire global community to say, how do we make this happen? And how do we make it happen sooner? So that is our task, and it's one we see ourselves rising to the challenge there.
Do you see us just rising to the challenge, or do you see an opportunity for U.S. global leadership to be kind of at the forefront of this movement, both supplying the rest of the world and maybe even bringing others along?
Absolutely. We have proven that we have the most efficient and the safest airspace system in the world. And look, I'll be honest, we're going to play second fiddle to anyone. We think we can do it here, and we can think that we can lead the world, and in some cases maybe supply the world. So that's where we were looking to go.
So I'll switch gears a moment. We spent almost 2 decades at the U.S. Chamber fighting to get an infrastructure bill enacted into law, and it was long overdue and way too complicated of a road. But it's done. Yes. And now we have investments being made through your agency and the administration in improving our aerospace system. Yes. What's that money going to? What's going to be the return on this investment from the American taxpayer?
Well, so when you think of the administration goal of that the FAA has been given $25 billion. $25 billion that how we work on improving our infrastructure. So $15 billion of that in terms of airport improvement grants. We've got $5 billion toward airport terminal improvement programs. We have money set aside for towers. So we have already given out, we've allocated about $2.8 billion of that. And we've got projects ongoing at 140 different airports. We are working across all of these programs to say we can improve and update runways and taxiways. We can improve and update our terminal structures. We have the ability for some airports to go and buy new equipment. Or expand that, Orlando expand the terminals, that you add some additional gates and added capacity. Florida's been a great place for folks that wanted to go to as of late. So our goal is to look across and do it in a very measured way. And there is no shortage of desire. And so part of the challenge for us is how to take away all of what comes in. We received $14 billion worth of requests just for the first $1 billion in spend. So to be able to do that in a way and allocate in a way to give us the maximum bang for the buck, this is our challenge. It's a good challenge to have, and we're certainly committed to making sure we get all of that money spent.
So no shortage of demand.
No shortage of demand.
Or opportunity.
Absolutely.
In that case.
Yeah.
So one of the things that we were talking about before we came up, particularly around the pandemic,
Yes.
was the fact that some of the policy work done in the Obama administration helped the Trump administration as they began to navigate the pandemic, and what the Trump administration built on was carried over into what the Biden administration is now able to do. If we think about that need for continuity and continued improvement across administrations, including across administrations of different parties, how do you think about your role and what you will leave your future successors as building blocks that they're going to continue to improve upon?
Well, if you look at it directly from the president has been out, you see where we're going with this, with the Biden-Harris administration, what we're doing, how do we improve infrastructure, how do we have a whole of government approach to our infrastructure, to our airspace management system. So it's all of that coming together. Secretary Buttigieg has been traveling, racing across the country in ways and showing that we are putting our money where our mouth is. I always say, yes, listen to our words, but our actions matter more. So it's really about the actions. So when I think about what we here in the FAA, our goal is to be a catalyst, is to be a key enabler and not an impediment, not a crutch to the industry. And we need that. We want to work together. We are working across every mode. So it's not enough to just in aviation. You look across the mode, 43,000 people died on our nation's highways. How do we get better at that? How do we bring our collective wisdom? And certainly there's no shortage of ideas here in this room, Neil, right? How do we bring that to bear to continue America's greatness and its continuity? To your earlier point now, I was at a particular airline during virtually the whole of the pandemic. My first day on the job was my first COVID meeting. And you look at how we brought our national will to bear and the speed with which we've got vaccine and testing, that not much of which didn't exist in February of 2020. And you look at where we are today. That is about coming together as a nation. I think is one of the best things that define America, and it certainly is an area that we show and demonstrate our global leadership.
Administrator Nolen, we got 1 minute, so I'm going to ask one final question. Sure. These are complicated issues. They're exciting but complicated. How can the people in this room best work with you and your team to maximize the potential? Well,
thank you. It's a really good question. I would turn to everyone in this room that says we welcome all ideas. We welcome your input. In fact, we need your input for us to be able to do it well. And it's a level of holding us accountable. It's what I get up every day and say, have we done everything we can do? And is there anything that gives me pause? The earlier question you asked, is this safe and would I put my family on it? And that's really one of the tests I will make. And as you know from my predecessor, Steve Dixon, as we look at things, we get up and says, am I comfortable there that saying myself and anyone else in this room can get aboard anything that we certify? It is coming together. bringing all those ideas to bear and working together to solve the biggest challenges of our time. And that's the help that we need, and that's the help we readily accept.
Well, we'll have to leave it there. I hope you all will join me in thanking Administrator Nolen for taking some time to spend with us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.